Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation titled Educator Networks Enhancing Children's Transition to School in Rural Areas as part of the 2022 Early Childhood Voices Conference. My name is Jessamy Davies and I'm a lecturer in early childhood education at Sturt University. And today I will be presenting some research findings from my PhD completed a couple of years ago. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people, who are the traditional owners of the land upon which I live, work and walk. I pay them respect and express my gratitude for their care of this country. I would also like to acknowledge any First Nations people who may be attending this conference and extend my respect and gratitude to them. The image on the slide there is of the mighty Murray River, located at Albury-Wodonga on the border of New South Wales and Victoria, where I live. And it's actually currently in flood, so it doesn't look quite like that at the moment. It's important to acknowledge that the PhD research took place as part of a much larger study. The larger study was titled Continuity and Change in Curriculum and Pedagogies as Children Start School. It was led by Chief Investigators Emeritus Professors Sue Dockett and Bob Perry, who were also my PhD supervisors, and I would like to acknowledge them and their work as being integral to the PhD research. The aims of the PhD project was to contribute to the overall project through a specific focus on rural perspectives, adding a unique lens and further depth to the data. The larger project was undertaken in a number of phases, and the relationship of the PhD research with the larger project occurs in phase 3, where a survey was done of prior to school and school educators. From this survey, a number of transition to school networks were identified, and from these, one became part of the PhD research. A further 3 networks were identified to form the focal point of the PhD study, and I'll talk more about the networks and what these looked like later on. In considering some of the literature as background to the study, the importance of a positive start to school is well established. We know that when children experience a positive start to their schooling, they're more likely to have higher educational and social outcomes and a more positive engagement with school over time. Having a strong connection to school is particularly important for children living in disadvantaged circumstances, as this has the capacity to disrupt cycles of social and economic disadvantage, as well as promoting resilience. One of the ways we understand positive transitions can be promoted is with a focus on continuity of pedagogies, where children's prior and current experiences are recognised and built upon, helping them to feel secure, confident and connected. Specifically, recommendations are made that in order for this to occur, prior to school and school settings should work together. While it's acknowledged and indeed recommended that educators should work together, much less is understood about when and how this should happen. So building on from the previous slide and what is known about effective transitions, a key focus of this research was to seek to understand how educator networks could work to bring together educators across prior to school and school settings, with the aim of enhancing children's transition to school experiences. In this study, educators are understood as involving a number of people with the aim of supporting the development of learning. Educational networks are known to be effective in enhancing professional learning for the benefit of both educators and children. Educators can share and create new knowledge that is valued and be supported in their ongoing learning and reflective practice. When there is increased collaboration among educators, professional relationships and regard are improved. From this, changes to practice and perspectives can occur, and ultimately, teaching and learning outcomes for children can be improved. This study had a particular focus on rural areas, and it's important to note that over 25% of Australia's population resides in rural areas. By rural, I'm referring to areas outside urban or metropolitan parts of Australia and are separated by geographical distance with smaller populations. Their voices are often not heard in the same way as their city counterparts. Rural areas face challenges around accessibility to essential services, including education and health services and good quality infrastructure. Rural areas are also associated with lower income and employment. Rural areas also have a high mortality rates, shorter life expectancy, and a greater risk for illness, disease, and mental health issues. In educational settings, there are differences in academic achievement for students in rural areas versus urban areas. It is harder to attract and retain teachers, access resources, deliver the curriculum, and there are fewer opportunities for professional development for teachers. However, there are many strengths as well associated with rural areas. These include higher social cohesiveness, volunteer rates, and feelings of safety within the community. Educational services are often the focal point for a community, a hub, or a place that brings people together, and are known to be creative, innovative, and resourceful, using what resources are available to them in flexible ways. It is these experiences and perspectives of rural communities I was aiming to highlight through this study. A qualitative interpretivist approach was adopted in order to seek out multiple perspectives, recognise and understand the experiences of individuals and their interpretation of these experiences, as well as recognise the importance of context in the collection and interpretation of the data. The theoretical framework for the study was Bronfenbrenner's PPCT, or Process, Person, Context and Time model, which aligns with an interpretivist paradigm, where it once again acknowledges the importance of context, as well as the processes and relationships that occur between individuals and their environment. The emphasis on context within the model is important for this study's consideration of rural contexts. It also aligns with contemporary understandings of transitions that understand transition to school as a process of relationship building between children, families, educators, and communities over time. As stated earlier, one network was identified from the larger study. A further 3 networks were identified using an alternative sampling method. These networks were located in rural communities, 2 in New South Wales and 2 in Victoria. The participants were a combination of educators and professionals from both prior to school and school settings who worked in a rural area and who belonged to a network which met regularly to collaborate around transition to school. Educators were those teaching in both prior to school and school settings. The professionals were not teachers, but held other professional roles such as maternal and child health nurses and community education organisers. The size of the network varied and ranged between 3 and 13 members. Data collection included attending the network meetings and conducting focus group interviews, as well as follow-up interviews with the network members. Data analysis was underpinned by constructivist grounded theory, where data collection and data analysis occur together, with each informing the other and recognising the co-construction of data and data analysis between the researcher and participant. For those international listeners who may not be familiar with Australian geography, Victoria and New South Wales, where the networks were located, are in the southeastern corner of the country. Now I'm going to share some of the results from the study. The 4 networks were all quite unique and different. 2 of the networks were larger and required greater levels of organisation. As a result, they tended to be more formal in nature. They tended to have formal meeting times with an agenda and someone keeping a record of the meeting. The other 2 networks were much smaller and tended to meet on a more spontaneous or incidental basis when they felt it was needed. This suggested that there is no formula for a network, Rather, there should be autonomy for the network, for the members, to run the network in a way that suits them. In other words, the networks are run by members for members. The networks shared a number of characteristics though. In all of the networks, there was a clear leader. The role of the leader varied from site to site, but included tasks such as organising the meetings, guiding the direction of the network, and facilitating future goals, as well as providing an important central point of contact for the other network members. The question of leadership within the networks was not always straightforward. Some members emerged as the leader, and some of these were uncomfortable as being labelled the leader of the network. In one site, the leadership was somewhat contentious, and there were some concerns among the network members around the bias that holding that leadership position may have. The leaders were seen to be very important to drive the networks, as well as for the sustainability and future direction of the networks. The networks required ongoing commitment and investment from their members, and that without the buy-in from members, the networks would lack cohesiveness. Commitment to and participation in the network required an investment of time for the network to work, and this was acknowledged by the members as a challenge. All 4 networks cited their key goal as improving transition to school in their communities. Having a clear purpose for the networks was very important. Sometimes goals were made explicit and recorded as part of the meeting agenda and minutes. Other times they were more informal. More specific goals included the expansion of the network, exploring possibilities for funding opportunities, and goals to improve the effectiveness of the network itself. The research suggested that the networks were highly valuable in their own right for improving transitions practices. But as well as this, they also acted as an enabler for other transitions to school pedagogies to occur. These other pedagogies included visits to the schools, information nights for families, speed dating, which is a communication strategy for prior to school and school educators to share information about each child and their family, organising reciprocal visits between the prior to school and school settings, buddy programs, classroom practices, which included teaching strategies to make prior to school and school more alike, all about school books, and transition statements. These additional pedagogies were not all used by all of the networks. Rather, they were used across them and in addition to the network itself, which acted as a facilitator for these to occur. Through the coming together to discuss the goals for transition and organise transition to school practices, there was great opportunity for professional collaboration. Some of the larger networks comprised representatives from different schools and prior to school settings, allowing the sharing of practices and discussion of ideas and problem solving. Here, important information could be shared across the network and lines of communication opened. An example of this was when the preschool teachers and school teachers of children starting school were able to communicate directly with one another. Reciprocal understandings refers to the idea of having shared or similar understandings, particularly around what happens in the other setting. This could be around the physical environment itself, the curricula or learning framework, the professional roles, the language used, as well as pedagogical practice. It was common, for example, for school educators to have little to no understanding of the early years learning framework prior to participating in the network. These reciprocal understandings are important for professional collaboration and ultimately improving transition to school for children. Members saw the network as being a method for building greater reciprocal understandings. Relationships and reciprocal understandings were mutually dependent, meaning positive relationships enabled greater understanding to occur, and that the building of this understanding improved relationships. There was some evidence that the relationships extended beyond the initial goal of improving transitions and had evolved into genuine, strong, and equal partnerships. Network meetings offered members face-to-face opportunities to develop these relationships. Network members described how participation in the network had afforded greater professional support through opportunities to work together and to share professional ideas and knowledge. Educators can both receive and offer support, which was especially important for those who described themselves as being in a professionally isolated role with little opportunity for professional development. Another very important element of building was the building of respect within the network in relation to some of the stereotypical views and tensions that exist between school and prior to school educators, where schools are sometimes seen as more important than early childhood settings. There was some evidence that the network was going some way to ameliorating some of these effects. So in conclusion, the main takeaway points from this research were that there is no formula for a transition to school network. The networks are developed from the bottom up, so to speak, are self-governing and practice-driven. They require leadership, a shared purpose, commitment, and common goals. That networks offer a range of benefits for transition to school practices and are not only a transition pedagogy themselves, but are also an effective driver for other transitions pedagogies to occur. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation, and please do contact me if you have any questions about the presentation or about my research. Thank you.